In the early versions of N-Audio, everything in your signal chain was a wave stream. But I soon realised that WaveStream was actually quite a complicated base interface to implement. In particular, the ability to reposition or report your length doesn't make sense for most components in an audio signal chain. So I wanted a simplified WaveStream that simply has a wave format property and the ability to read from it. And that's what IWaveProvider does. It's just got two methods on it. It's got the wave format property and it's got the read method from WaveStream. The position you are in the stream becomes irrelevant. If you need to find that out or reposition, then you would go back to the source WaveStream that you were reading from to do that. By simplifying the interface, it makes it much easier to implement simple components to go in your signal chain. However, it's still not perfect. Because we're reading into a byte array, it's not very easy to get at individual samples. So for example, if we're using 16-bit integer samples, then really instead of a byte array, we'd like a short array. Or if we're dealing with 32-bit floating point audio, then instead of a byte array, we'd much rather have a float array. So again, it was still quite hard to work with, because you needed to know how to read shorts or floating point numbers out of a byte array. So the solution N-Audio offers to this problem is the SampleProvider interface. This is essentially the same as IWaveProvider, but it's designed exclusively for working with 32-bit IEEE floating point samples. And the reason for this is that that's the format you most often want your audio to be in if you're going to be doing any kind of effects or analysis on it. So for example, in a typical signal chain, if you were to start off with compressed audio, say an MP3 file, your first step would be to decompress to PCM. And most codecs would emit integer samples. So then your next step would be to convert to IEEE floating point. And at this point, we can have a sample provider. Then, using sample providers, you can perform all your effects and analysis. And only at the end would you convert back to integer PCM samples to send to your sound card, for example. Or if you were writing a file or sending the audio over the network, you might again use a codec to reduce the bitrate of the audio. Let's have a look at the methods and properties on an ISampleProvider. Well, it's very simple. You've got the wave format property again, which is going to be returning a wave format that indicates that this is 32-bit IEEE floating point, and then a read method, which is very similar to the read methods in IWaveProvider and WaveStream. But it takes a float buffer, and this makes it really convenient to get at the samples. We can just index into that float buffer to get at each individual sample. I've already mentioned that N-Audio comes with a lot of signal chain components for you. Let's just have a look at a small sampling of them. There are several which implement the WaveStream base class. In particular, the file readers tend to do this because it's the file readers that can report their length and allow you to set their position. So Wave File Reader, MP3 File Reader, Media Foundation Reader, they're all wave streams. There's LoopStream that allows you to play some audio and then loop back to the beginning and play it again in a constant loop. Waveformat Conversion Stream also implements WaveStream. There are also a few wave providers. One of the most useful is Buffered Wave Provider, which contains a circular buffer, allowing you to store up audio to be read out later. There's also Volume Wave Provider 16, which allows you to adjust the volume even when you're still working with 16-bit audio samples, rather than needing to go to IEEE floating point. And there's also a large collection of sample providers. Volume Sample Provider lets you adjust the volume. Mixing Sample Provider mixes two or more sample providers together. There's Multiplexing Sample Provider, which makes it easier to work with multi-channel audio. An Offset Sample Provider allows you to skip over a bit of audio and to insert some silence as well. We'll be looking at several of these and many others later on in the course. But you should also remember it's very easy to create your own, particularly using the SampleProvider base interface. So let's have a look at doing that now.